Hi, everyone. This is Heather Box from the Million Person Project. And the Million Person Project is a global project about love, storytelling, and connecting change makers. And I'm really excited to be here today with Caledonia Curry, who is also an artist who goes by Swoon and a really, really radical change maker in the world. I'm so excited that you joined this conversation about the power of storytelling. So welcome. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Hi, so I'm Callie, also go by Caledonia Curry, also go by Swoon, lots of names. Yeah, good to be here.
Well, thank you for joining the conversation. And I wanted to start off by saying that I have watched you over the last few years tell your personal story in some incredibly courageous ways. And ways that feel like when you're someone in the audience member, like this is risky, that she's out on the edge. And I'm wondering,
Literally,
why are you sharing your story in that way?
Just to say, the moments that you've seen me tell my story and you say this is risky, that is the correct feeling. I have done so many different things in my life, like physically dangerous things, socially, all different kinds of things that other people have gone like, whoa, you did that haven't made me bat an eyelash. But telling my story personally was the most difficult, the most terrifying. I mean, the first time I did it, I thought that I was going to lose control of myself in so many ways. It was shocking to me, the extent to which I wanted to throw up and pass out and run out of there. And I mean, literally like an Iraqi veteran grabbed me and was like, I see you freaking out and I want to help you. And he was like, when we would be in battle, if I would feel this way where I couldn't control myself, I would walk it out. And he was like, come here, pace with me. And he had me just like walking by the bathrooms before my talk. And then they couldn't find me and they had to rearrange the order of my talk. And so just to say that the level of on the edge for me when I have given these talks is really, really real, as more than anything I've ever done. And I think that for that same reason, there's a way in which I think that it's also some of the most important work I've ever done. And, there are a lot of different ways to explain why I think it's important, but, I guess I just deeply believe in honesty and in cultural sharing and in the fact that so much of what I have learned over the past few years are things that I didn't know 5 years ago, things that would have changed my life if I knew them earlier. And so I really believe that by sharing what I've been through, that other people who are in my same situation, who are thousands and millions of people, can connect with it. And, I just want to say this is kind of a bit of a mystical sounding story, so forgive me if I'm getting a bit wooey, but my mom was sick with cancer when I first met you guys, and I was flying home the next day. I had been back and forth caring for her in Florida and she really didn't want us to be there when she died, but I was gonna not obey her wishes and go there anyway and be with her for her last days. And the morning that we were supposed to speak in Turkey and you guys were introducing us, I woke up and I was flooded with the most intense dreams of my mother. And there were, all this light coming through my body and her voice. And I woke up and I was like, oh my God, my mom just died and there's nothing I can do about it. And I'm going to fly home tomorrow. And so I'm just going to do my day and wait for my sister to call and tell me. And so with that feeling, I went to 350 and I went to give the talk, and you guys introduced us and you said, we're this group of people and we help people tell their stories within their work because we think it helps us trust each other more and connect more. And I was like, this has to be my moment. This has to be my sign that I just woke up going, okay, there's nothing that I can do to connect with my mom at this moment in her passing, but there is something that I can do to share the process of her life. And so that was why I grabbed you. I was like, hey, I think that I've got something that I need to share.
That was a really interesting moment for me too, because it's just this moment that comes across every once in a while where you're like, trust the feeling you have.
Yeah.
Because when you were talking to me, you weren't saying any of that. You were just saying, I think telling my story could be useful. I think this is important to me. I have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how to, whatever it was. And for me, I was feeling such a resonance in my being. And it's like, when I feel that, it's like, trust it, go with it. It was like the next time I was on the internet, I was like, I gotta email that.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
One of the things that I would love for you to tell the viewers is, what is kind of the message? You know, some of your viewers may have not seen your viral video about your personal story, which they should check out. And I'll put the link here. But can you tell the viewers what is the message of your story, and why was it such a difficult story for you to tell?
Well, I think that the main message of my story, in the very, very simplest terms, is about how we awaken compassion and forgiveness inside of ourselves now as people living in this moment today. You know, I think that those are concepts that we hear and that we get passed down, but I got to a place in my life where I was like, okay, but what does that mean to me today? How do I live this? And so I came to a place of incredible understanding of my family that I just felt that I wanted to share, because I was like, this is a translation in the present tense of what these concepts mean for me today, which means that it can be relevant for others today. And you know, the reason that I tell my specific story is because I think that, you know, the family that I come from is a really difficult family, and tons of drug addiction and mental illness and trauma, and just are people who left me with a legacy that's maybe not the easiest one in the world. And so when I am now engaged in the hard work of understanding who they were, where they were coming from, how they ended up where they did, why they raised me in the way that they did, I realized that the message that it sends to come out the other side of that with compassion and really truly seeing them as whole beings is one that's not just about being like, oh, it's easy, you should just do it, it just happens, you should forgive people, don't you just see that everyone's great? You know, it's not some fluffy message. It's like, no, actually, part of me hates these people. Part of me grew up in deep shame and deep confusion. I hid where I came from. And even they hid it in so many ways. And to say, coming out the other side of that and finding this place of understanding and wanting to say, I think that I see something that is at the core of what my meaning of life is. Sorry, it's not very articulate about it today.
No, I mean, one of the things that I would love for you to do is, that I think would be an interesting exercise, would be to just, if you can, to our viewers that are out there that are in a position where they are feeling shame about their story, or they're hiding their personal story intentionally.
Right.
Could you just speak directly to them and say, like, what's the invitation? What's the complication? Where are the possibilities for them in telling their story?
One of the most important things for me about telling my story, in spite of my shame, is that it sends two messages. And the first message it sends is one to myself, which says, I am not ashamed. It's okay for me to share these things. It wasn't my fault. It was the life I was born into. And even the decisions that I made as an adult, which are my fault, are not things that I want shame from. They're things that I want to share and own and heal from. And sending that message to yourself is an incredible gift. And then I think that the second message it sends is to other people, is to say, you know, I think that I, for example, am an artist that a lot of young women look to and say, okay, you know, say, like, I'm a young woman in college, for example, and I'm looking at this artist, I see Callie and I see what she's doing, and she's done all these things. And I think, oh, that's okay. She can do that because life's been easy for her, or because, you know, she was whatever, because she doesn't have the baggage and the shame and the bullshit that I have, because I come from this dark place and I don't deserve these things. And for me, it's just a desire to say, like, hey, all of us come from deeply flawed places, and we are all in a process of trying to make a life that's whole and that's good for us. And that I think that my sharing and my not being ashamed of the parts of my life that weren't perfect also send a message to other people, that even people who maybe spend half their life making it look really shiny and making it look really good are actually almost always people who have a deep and difficult territory that they've crossed, because we all have, because that's what being human is. And so I think that the act of sharing that is such an act of connection. And I feel like, when I was a teenager, I remember this moment standing before a Van Gogh painting, and I could see the way that the light was moving through the painting, and it felt the way that I sometimes feel on a certain day, where the world is just kind of exploding to life and everything feels like it's kind of moving a little bit and it's alive, and you're sort of, it's almost kind of psychedelic. And I was like, oh my God, my mind and the mind of this Dutchman from, the 17th century or whatever, that is the same mind. It's the same mind. Like, I get him. He's dead, but I don't feel alone in this moment, because one mind is speaking directly to my mind. And so I think that when I share my story, I'm trying to do the same thing of making a place whereby people who listen don't feel alone. And when that happens, I also don't feel alone.
Wow. I mean, for me, it's that inner connection that is so important. It's like, tell your story to set yourself free. And in your freedom, you send an invitation to the world to for us out there to set ourselves free too.
Totally.
And that, I think, is so important, that distinction. Like, you aren't telling your story because it's a tool to heal other people. You're telling your story because it's a tool to heal yourself. Yeah. And in that healing, others can find their own healing,
Totally. Absolutely.
So one of the things that I've worked with you on as a collaborator is these projects where we have worked inside maximum security prisons, in rehab centers, with people who are reentering after coming out of prison. Mm-hmm. What is your hope and your intention of working in those programs?
Yeah. Well, so I think the initial reason that I was drawn to those programs is because of my family background. From being born into a family of people who were severely addicted and who suffered in all different kinds of ways, I grew up in our sort of punishing culture with a deep, deep, deep misunderstanding of how my family got to be in the place that it was. And then in the last few years, as I came to understand the link between trauma and drug addiction, mental illness, violence, I had a very radical revolution of self around coming to that understanding that basically no person ends up in somewhere within the justice system, particularly with severe drug addictions, with severe mental illness, or being incredibly violent, without suffering immensely, and usually in their formative years before they get there. And I that understanding started because I was trying to understand my mom. And when I came to a place where I could see my mom's past history, where I could see how she came to be a woman who was so unable to regulate herself that heroin seemed like her best choice, I was able to forgive her. I was able to see her. I was able to hold a totally different image of her in my mind, and I was able to forgive her. And the gift that gave to my life is not something that I could ever measure. And so I was just like, how can I take this experience and bring it into the world in ways that impact more people? And, as an artist, that's something that I always want to do, is like, how do I take the raw material of my life and bring it into the world in ways that are meaningful? And so, taking that experience of being like, wait a minute, I think that we're misunderstanding so many of the ways that people are struggling. And I think that we are creating these incredibly punitive systems out of this misunderstanding. And ultimately, I think that these systems are deeply unethical and immoral. And that if we really got deep into ourselves and questioned ourselves about what we were doing, whether or not it was working, and just, kind of gave ourselves the moment of looking into the hearts of these individuals, that we could maybe make some different choices. And so I really, really want to bring my work into a place where we can get that conversation going, and where I'm connecting with people and sharing with them the tools that I have learned throughout my life. So like in the jails that we worked in and in the rehab program, it was that I started off by saying, here's how creativity has gotten me through the roughest times of my life. How can we put this as a tool in your hand? And then spending that time with people, getting to know people, connecting you with them so that they could share their stories, and then trying to, just make spaces within which the portraits and the work that we did and the stories that they told could start to become part of the public dialogue is really my goal. Because I think that the question of compassion is such a huge one. And I don't like compassion in the abstract. I like this question of like, where does the rubber meet the road on this? How can this idea become something that we live? How does it become nuts and bolts? The gears are turning. We're doing, we're creating, we're acting on these values and creating different ways that we can interact with each other and understand each other.
Mm. Yeah. And one of the things that came up for me in the project that we worked in is, as a society, we put so much stigma on different experiences,
Yes.
right? Like, it's like, if you're addicted to drugs, it's like this. And I feel like our world is barely ready to accept somebody for being the victim of something.
Mm.
Even if you're a victim of rape, or you're a victim of forced incest, or you're a victim of abuse, there is such a huge stigma around that. And it takes so much personal work to be able to share that and to be like, can I stand in this? And is there room for me to be me, given that this is my history?
Mm-hmm.
I want to live in a world where there's enough room for people to stand in that, and there's enough room for the people who were the perpetrator of those things to stand in their experience. And that feels really audacious for me to say, but it is the world I want to live in, because who wants to be held to their darkest moment for the rest of their life? Whether your darkest moment is something personal, or it's something you did to someone, or it's something that, was done to you. What does it mean to be held to that forever? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is what we're doing in our criminal injustice system. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to try to break out of stigmas and say, this is who I am? And what do you negotiate when you're doing that? And when you see other people doing that?
The first thing that came to my mind when you were talking is just that I think that the most important reason to make a space where not only are we hearing and feeling compassion for victims, but also for perpetrators, is because I don't think we stand a chance in hell of healing people so that they stop perpetrating, unless we make a compassionate space to hear them and to see them as human beings and to have a desire for them to be able to heal. Punishment doesn't work. We know that. We have a hard time getting over the desire to punish, but punishment is about people who are victims. It's not really about the perpetrator, and it's not really about healing or change, which means it's not really about our safety, I think that me and you had this really radical moment. We had many radical moments, but one of the most radical moments that we had was when we were going through my second talk, and you asked me something about forgiveness, and then all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I'm here and I'm talking about people who are in prison for violent offenses. And I'm talking about all of these things, and I'm talking about what I endured in my own childhood. But there's another thing that I haven't talked about, and that's the fact that in my deepest love relationships, I can become a fucking maniac. I can become so abusive that it's one of the most painful experiences that I've had is to behave in that way. And all of a sudden, somehow we got to that space where it was like, oh, actually, I think this needs to be talked about, because this is part of the story too. Because if I am standing up here and saying, have compassion for people, they've been through things, that's why they're behaving in this way, I was like, ooh, I'm not separate from this story. This is exactly true for me. This is exactly what's happening for me, is that I see that I came through this life where being in a loving space was very scary. And so when I get into a loving space again, I sometimes lose my shit. And if I can have compassion for myself and keep having compassion for myself, because I've lost my shit even after I stood up there and gave that talk and said, hey, I'm doing the work of healing. And you know what? It wasn't a magic switch. Like, it's still happening. I remember when I first started to say, oh my God, I think that I am an abuser. I think that I am a perpetrator. And I wanted to reach out for help. I like to read books about things. And I was like, oh, guess what? There are no books about when you're the abuser. Like, you don't get to try to heal yourself. And I was like, that's not cool. That is not okay. People who want to stand up and say, I am in the wrong, I'm not doing the right thing, I need to change this, should also have resources, because for the safety of all of us, And so it just made it really clear to me that it's so important to stand up, not just as victim, but also as, perpetrator, as the person who behaves really badly sometimes, as the person who gets what it's like to lose it and to not be the best version of yourself, and to really want the opportunity to change.
Yeah. We all have it all inside of us. I mean, it's our nature as human beings. We're very resilient. We adjust to our life situations. We handle some of it really well, some of it not so well. And so for me, that's the key to storytelling, is when you understand someone's situation, it's so easy to understand them. When you understand their story and where they're coming from and how they love and what gives them hope and what happened to them and what they did, all of a sudden it becomes really easy to see them. And to, even if you're kind of cringing about what they've been through or what they've done or whatever, you can still see their heart. Since I've been around you a lot and I've been in conversations with you a lot about this, one of the things that I notice is that you use this hand gesture to say things like, this is what we need with each other. And it looks like you're holding something when you say it. And I've never heard you actually put words to what is that you're experiencing when you say, I want more of that in the world?
I think that what I'm referring to is a kind of a moment that happens when you're really connecting with someone, where all of a sudden it doesn't matter what they've done, any of the defenses that they are putting up, or any of the anger, or any of the roadblocks. All of a sudden it's like things line up and you get this clear shot that's straight through to this utterly indestructible part of who they are. And it's like this beam of light, and it's like, oh, hello, there you are. You were born like that. You are amazing. You are perfect. I see it. I get it. And we don't have that experience that much, because it takes a lot of navigating. And I think that the work that you are trying to do, and in a lot of times the work that I am trying to do, is about how do you make that path easier? How do you make it easier for people to cross through all the barriers, and for people to get that straight shot into that kind of perfect, luminous part of each person, because we all know that it's there. We know that there is no human that doesn't have it. And yet there's so much that's keeping us from seeing it, that's keeping us from believing it. And I don't know why that is. I don't know how that happens. But I think that the work of trying to break down the barriers to it is good work. I'm down. I think it's some of the most important work we can do.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And I love that that's the, with Jess, who worked on one of the projects in Philly with us.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that we talk like that now. We'll be like, well, yeah. I think, and sometimes we are in a place where words aren't as accessible, because we are talking about sort of how do we create the situation where the essence of somebody can be seen and felt and known.
Yeah.
How do we as people allow our essence to be known? That is really the inquiry for me. Mm-hmm. And there are so many different ways to do that. But mm-hmm. storytelling, I think, is one of them.
Yeah, it's such a powerful one.
Yeah. And so I'd love for you in closing to sort of speak to people right now who they're watching this video. They're maybe they're artists, or they're young people, or they're people who have been through something and they're not telling their story. What is sort of your call to our viewers?
There's so much shame around sharing our story. People stop themselves from sharing by saying, oh, I'm going to be telling a poor me and it's going to be a pity party. But I think that almost every time somebody really stands up and tells a full 360 truth in the round, it shatters something, and people are like, oh my God, thank you for that. Because when the story is true, and when the story is real, and when it includes all its parts, it's so powerful. It's not a pity party. And in fact, being ashamed, I really think that being ashamed is part of the sort of dominant culture of victimization. And so to stand up and to be brave and to get past all those layers of fears is part of healing and is part of rebellion. And I just had this kind of realization the other day. Just allow me to digress for a second, where I was thinking about so many of our cultural icons of rebellion. And I was thinking, for example, Sid and Nancy, right? So you get this kind of like, oh, this is punk, like this is rebellion. And I looked at it, and through my kind of new understanding of trauma and things, I was like, oh my God, that's victims of so many things playing out their victimization in this way, not healing, and essentially being kind of just like fitting right in with like the dominant culture of victimization and of just being victims to that. And I was like, wait a minute, when you make a decision to heal, and when you stand up and tell your story, even when it's maybe not the most popular thing to say, and when you tell the full truth of it, that growth and that healing is truly rebellious, because you truly are standing up and pushing back against all of the forces within the dominant culture that want you to stay silent, or that want you to fall apart in some spectacular way. That in fact, that this form of rebellion of telling your true story is so much stronger.
I'm going to be somebody in the audience right now, and I'm going to react as them. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm inspired to tell my story, and I want to tell my story, but I feel like, what about how it's going to impact my family? What about the stigma that might come in my workplace? Those are some of the questions, that are coming through my mind. How do you react to that?
When I first shared my talk, I was really afraid of how my family was going to react. And I sent it out to my family first, and I kind of just waited. And instead of getting, how could you do that? How could you share these things? How could you say these things about our family? I got back, we're so sorry. We've been worried about you guys since you were little, and we just want you to know that we love you and support you. And I got that over and over again. And I realized that the thing is that when you share, there are many people who are affected by the exact same situation, who just aren't in a position to share, who just can't. Maybe they're not communicators or storytellers at this moment in their lives, and maybe you are. And it becomes part of this larger network of healing and of linking arms.
Can you speak directly to this idea of being categorized as somebody, of saying the truth and then never being able to go back into hiding?
Mm-hmm. I think it's almost impossible to get truly categorized as something, because it's so much harder to get people to hear it. Like for me, every once in a while, there'll be a moment where I think that a journalist is being sensationalist and just saying the sort of like flashiest thing up front, and I will feel a little annoyed. But for the most part, what I find is that I want to say it more and more and more, because when you're saying something that's truly asking a lot for people to hear it, you're not just going to fall into a rut of that thing. In fact, you're going to have to say it more and more and more just to really feel that the truth of it is being shared. And so I think that, when you're standing up and when you're really saying something that's loud and that's real and that's pushing boundaries and that takes a lot of bravery, it also takes bravery for people to listen to it. And so, that work is something that everyone's doing together. Like, you don't just get stuck with it. It becomes what you want to do, what you want to share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that idea that, that there is a really big role for the listener to be able to receive that. And not everybody can. And that's okay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that people are at where they're at.
Yeah.
And for me, one of the things that I always think about is like, we've been given the gift to be us in this life. And yes, our stories may cause us stigma, or it may push people away from us, or we may not fit in our job anymore when we tell our story. And so it's a really big personal question to ask, like, is it your time? Do you want to do this? And no one has to, but the question that I always ask is, do you want to work somewhere where you're not accepted for who you are?
Yeah.
And do you want to be friends with people who wouldn't accept you if they knew the true you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that my decision as an artist from very early on, when I asked myself, as an artist, everyone wants to be significant in some way, and you want to do something unique and important and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. Nobody knows how to do that. I was like, okay, fine. The only thing I can do is say, I am the only me that's ever existed in this moment now. So if I be the most me, the most right now, then that's the best I can do. Then that will be the thing that's important for me to give to the world. And you come to those moments where you're like, okay, this people aren't going to like me for this. This people aren't going to understand me for this. And it's like, yeah, but I want to live in the world that accepts me. And the more you become yourself through telling your story, the more you find that if you push people away who can't accept you, there's this kind of convection current that happens where now you're drawing people toward you who can accept you, and your life is changing in really powerful ways.
Wow. So beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I couldn't think of a better person to be part of this conversation around the power of storytelling.
Thank you so much. Also, hold on. I just want to interrupt you and say that our work together has been totally life-changing for me. I don't know if I really iterated that enough, that when I met you and when I decided to do this work, I've really felt that I entered into what has been the most important work of my life as an artist. I've done so many different kinds of projects, but this is the first project where I'm taking my truest deepest self and channeling it straight into what I'm doing. And so for me, it's the work that I'm most proud of. And I just want to thank you for like making a space to let me do that. It's so huge.
The amount of courage that you have is so inspiring, and it holds me accountable to myself. And it helps me to stay in integrity with my truth and my story, to watch someone so boldly, so publicly share all of who they are, and to be willing to step out when all the dots aren't connected. Mm-hmm. And they're just dots. And this is what I'm saying about them. And in that act, so many times those dots start to make sense together, but you have to have some witnesses to mm-hmm. allow that clarity to come.
So true.
So I'd love for you to tell the viewers how they can be in touch with you and check out your work and follow you. Mm-hmm. Okay. And any parting message you have for them.
Okay. Great. Well, so the best ways, I guess, to see my work, I do daily posts on Instagram and on Facebook. I've also shared the talks and transcripts of the talks and the various ways that that we've done this work. I'm sort of sharing it through that. And there will be a website coming with the talks that we gave. But I think right now, Instagram Swoon HQ and then Facebook Swoon Studio are really good ways. And then I also have a project called Combe Shelter and another project named Braddock Tiles. And so you can just Google search those. And as far as being in touch, you can just like leave a comment on one of my things and leave your email address if there's something that you want to talk about. I don't always answer my comments, but I do look at them. And so sometimes if there's a question, I can reach back out. And yeah, just thank you again. I really have been so grateful for the work that we've done, and I'm so excited to keep going.
Yay. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you tomorrow, viewers. Okay. Thanks for tuning in.